With this tote bag, I just wanted to bring you something really, really simple so that anybody, even if it's the first time you've ever sewn or you've made a bag, are going to be able to achieve a bag that looks like this. It's professionally finished, it's all fully lined, and it's got a square base as well. So you're going to learn a few different techniques here as well. But it's so simple, no pockets, no fastening, no zips involved, but I think you'll agree it's really stylish. So this is how you're going to make it. The outer fabric, my plain fabric, measures 13 inches across by 13.5 inches deep. Now this fabric is really quite heavy, it's like upholstery fabric, the kind of fabric that you may use for curtains or home decor, that kind of thing. If you're going to use a finer fabric, then I'd suggest you put some kind of stabiliser on the back of it to make it that little bit thicker. Otherwise you're going to have a floppy bag, which is fine if you want a floppy bag. The lining measures 13 inches across, but 14.5 inches in depth, so it's an inch longer than it is the outside of the bag. The handles, I've got two handles on this one, and these measure 27 inches in length by 4 inches in width. And I've already pressed this one so that I fold it in half, press, and then fold the two long edges to the centre, press, and then fold the whole thing in half again. And then you probably find, I mean, this is quite a fine cotton, it's a quilt weight cotton. You won't need to put any stabiliser inside there. If you want the handles a little bit stiffer, then you can do. What I'm also going to put on the front of this bag, because I thought it looked a little bit too plain, is a heart-shaped piece of applique, which is about 7 inches in length. That could be anything you like. You could put buttons on the front, you could put a bow on the front, and if you have a look on one of my other videos, I'll put the link on there. I'll show you how to make that perfect shape of heart if you don't have a template to draw around. Okie doke, right, this is going to be the first thing that I do. We'll take the two outer pieces, the lining to one side for a second, and I'm going to make the base of this bag square. So I'm going to draw a box measuring 1.5 inches on each bottom corner, and you do this on all 4 pieces, so the 2 outside pieces and the 2 lining pieces. Basically, if you cut out your box 1.5 inches, you'll have a base of just under 3 inches. So you could make that narrower, you could make it a lot bigger if you wanted to change the size of your bag. So let's cut out this box shape in the corner. And I just used a friction pen to draw that. Doesn't really matter because you can cut straight along the line, so any kind of marking pen will do. Friction pens disappear with heat, so I tend to use them a lot, but they do have a bit of a reputation of sometimes bleaching your fabric, so just make sure you're marking within the seam allowance. So let's do the same with the lining. So just cut the two together, so I'm making sure that the edges meet up. Now instead of using the ruler, I can use the cut-out shape from the previous piece, because it's a little bit easier. There we go. And then cut out that shape. Lining to one side, and let's put the applique onto one piece of the fabric. I want to make sure it sits in the centre, and the easiest way to do that is to fold your fabric in half and finger crease it, so I get the line down the centre, and my heart's going to sit right in the middle there. Now across the bottom, this is where the base is going to be square, so that part of the bag is going to fold under and those parts are going to fold to the side. So don't have your heart too close to the bottom, otherwise it's going to wrap around the bottom of the bag. So slightly higher than halfway, right in the centre, is the perfect place, I think, for this heart. So now we'll have a little bit of just scrap fabric that I've just picked up off the floor, and I'm just going to put some repositionable spray adhesive on the back of here. You could pin if you like. I just find that using adhesive means that you don't need to pin. It helps to keep the fabric flat as you're sewing, so it's not going to pucker up. And as it's repositionable, I can pick it up and move it around if it's in the wrong place. So I've got Crafter's Companion Stick and Spray for fabric, or you can use a product called 505. Right, let's sew this on. I'm just going to use a straight stitch on this one for speed, but if you've got a fancy stitch on your sewing machine, if you wanted to use a zigzag stitch or a decorative stitch, and I do appreciate that as I'm just sewing straight around the raw edge, there may be a little bit of fraying eventually, but I like that frayed kind of look. So if you don't want to fray, then you could use a satin stitch, which is your zigzag stitch but very close together. Have a practice on a scrap piece of fabric first of all, so that you can make sure you've got the right stitch length and stitch width, and then you can make it look like a solid line. But for this one, I just like a little bit of fraying. I think it looks, I don't know, it's that shabby chic kind of look, isn't it? Okay, so around we go. You could always use something like your Bonder Web, which is an adhesive sheet. So you iron that onto the back of your applique, peel off the paper backing, then re-iron it onto your fabric. It will be permanent, but that will stop your fabric from fraying as well if you don't want that kind of look. Right, back to the beginning. And I'll just put a lock stitch on there, or do a couple of stitches backwards if you don't have that facility on your sewing machine. Now for the handles. So remember, I folded this in half and then in half again and pressed So now I'm going to sew down both sides. I don't need to sew across the ends because the ends are going to be within a seam. That'll make sense in just a second. Just a quick stitch down either side. Just neaten the end of that off. Now your strap is going to go on the top of the outside of each piece of the bag, facing downwards, and make sure that that doesn't twist as you put it on. So we don't want that, because that's just going to look really odd. And as I know my heart is in the centre, I'm going to make my strap sit just inside, so it just overlaps the end of the heart. And if you're making this bag exactly, that will be 3 inches from either side. So I'll pin that. And then just tack across the top. Then I can take out my pins, snip off these threads, and then put the second handle onto the opposite side. So the easiest way to do that is to line up the 2 top sections and match up the position of your strap. And it's important that these are kind of mirror images of each other, because it would look really odd if your straps don't match when you're carrying the bag. So again, just make sure that there's no twisting in there. Another pin. And we'll tack that one in place in the same way. And when you're tacking these, sew quite close to the edge of the fabric. It's only a tacking stitch, you're not going to see them, but that does need to sit inside the seam allowance, because when I sew the bag together I don't want to see those stitches that I've just made. Next thing we're going to do is to put the lining pieces to the outside, straight across the top. So I'm not going to pin this time. If you find it easier, then do so. And you'll probably notice I'm using my 1/4 inch foot on the sewing machine, or quilting foot sometimes called. I'm not quilting this obviously, I just find it easier to use this foot because then I can gauge an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance just by using the marks on the side of the foot. Don't rush out and buy one if you don't have one, but if you're going to make a lot of bags or a lot of my projects, I do tend to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance most of the time, and that's just the easiest way, I think, to gauge it. Okay, second side of the bag together in the same way. So just sew straight across the top, the lining and the outside. This is what I mean about tacking close to the edge. So now when I sew, that's going to be within the seam, not on the outside. If you're going to be carrying anything particularly heavy in your bag, then you can reinforce the handles as you sew across here. Simply by, when you come to the handles, go backwards and then forwards a few stitches. You can go over that a few times if you wish to make that even stronger. Right, so now we have this. So you can see how the bag's coming along. We'll need to sew right sides together, the front and the back of the bag. Make sure that your handles are out of the way. We don't want to sew those into the seams. Now when I'm sewing around this, I'm going to sew all the way around the outside, not in the cut-out pieces in the corners, and in the base of the lining I'll need to leave a gap of about 6 inches so I can turn the whole thing right side out. I need to make sure that these side seams match. And I know I say it quite a lot, but it's quite true. You don't notice when your seams match perfectly. You do notice when they don't. So that's the most important area at this point for me, to make sure, that they line up. So I'm going to put a pin in both sides. Your seam allowance can go towards the, which way are we going to go? Towards the lining on these. Oh, I've got a bent pin there. Let's do the same on that side. Okay, then we will sew all the way around. And I'm going to start from that seam as well, because again, that is the most important part of this bit. So I can take the pin out now and sew. So that's how we're looking now. Now to make the square base of the bag, I'm going to take each of those corner pieces that I didn't sew, open them up and squish them together so that the side seam sits right on top of the bottom seam, and then we'll sew straight across. I'm not worried about pressing seam allowances open in a bag like this. I don't think it's that important. So we do this, and then I'm going to repeat that with the remaining 3 corners. Open out, squish together, and sew. Now remember where I left a hole in the lining so I could turn this the right side out. That's what I'm going to do here. And this is how that square base is looking now. There you go. And the same in the top. In the lining, sorry. Okay. I had a tuck in the seam just there. So if you do make a little mistake like that, that's not very good. We can turn this the right inside out again, unpick, and simply sew that little bit again. There it is. I don't need to unpick the whole of the seam, it was just where that stitch had caught. So make sure that's flat. See, it happens to the best of us. And then we'll sew across. There you go. That time it's perfect. Now before I go any further, you can see how we're looking. It's looking quite bag-like. I do have that hole in the bottom that I need to address. So the easiest way to do that is to pull either side of the hole. The edges will want to fold in. If they don't, just push them in a little bit. And then we're just simply going to machine sew across the bottom. If you want that to be a really professional, invisible finish, then you could hand sew it, but to be honest, even in a lot of shop bought bags or even jackets with linings, you'll see the holes closed over like this, so perfectly acceptable to do so. So let's neaten off these stitches. Then we're going to push the lining inside the bag. Now remember when I gave you the measurements for cutting out the fabrics right at the beginning? The lining was 1 inch longer than the actual bag. And that means that when you push the lining inside and the base meets up in the corners, you're going to have a border around the top of 1/2 inch. And I think that gives it a nice professional finish. So what I need to do now is to take this away to the iron and press it. And then when I come back, I'm going to just put a running stitch or an edge stitch all the way around the top. And that's going to help keep the layers together, and it's just that nice professional finishing touch. I like to start any kind of top stitching like this on a side seam or somewhere where you're not going to see, just in case when I come back to the beginning again the stitches don't overlap perfectly. So around we go. As I'm sewing, make sure that the handle is facing upwards and nice and square, and this means that the top stitching is going to help the handle sit in the right direction, if you like. And keep the lining flat as well, because we don't want any little puckers on the inside. And I've taken the accessory compartment off my sewing machine, so I'm using the free arm, which means I'm sewing around in a circle. Most of your machines should have that facility. Just got a tiny thread just there. There we are. So quite a bulk of fabric as I go over the handle, so it may need an extra little bit of help, and on the side seams. The handles you can make any length that you like, so if you prefer a strap that goes all the way across your body, or if you prefer just one that sits over your arm, then you can adjust the length. But I think you're going to be making quite a few of these, because they're really useful. School bag, college bag, shopping bag, gym bag. You need at least one of each. Right, just take that thread away there. And on the inside. And then we're coming back up to the beginning. And just fix the stitches off. Snip this off. Snip that off. And we're finished.